In 1989, a couple guys from Nebraska had a few revolutionary ideas that they hoped would put them in the Bonneville record books.
They were laughing at us, you guys are from Nebraska. Do you really have machine shops out there? They knew it wouldn't set a record. One guy walked up and looked at it and said, "That looks like the motor in my pickup truck." But we set the record, and we bumped it up about 12 miles an hour.
Welcome to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast that tells the stories behind the cars and the people who build and drive them. I'm Joe McCullough, and in this episode, John MacKichan and Tim Schulz tell us about building a Bonneville Streamliner from scratch, crashing at 200 miles per hour, the fascinating people who come out of the woodwork when you're building something so technically awesome, and all the highs and lows of chasing land speed records on the Bonneville Salt Flats. How did you two meet each other?
Well, it was at Square D.
Yeah, we worked at the same company for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And you just kind of realized that you were both into cars and...
Well, we talked about cars. We knew that we were both into them, but what really brought us together was in 1988 when Speedway Motors was helping build the Don Gartlett's car.
The Swamp Rat Streamliner.
Yes, yeah. Number 33. And I'd done quite a bit of work on it, and I asked Tim to come over and help us wire it, and he got involved in it, and there wasn't a lot of wiring on that car, but we got it right. And had a good time with it and set 2 records. Got 2 guys in the 2 club, that one meet in 88. Don Kerr and Don Gartlett's both got in the 2 club.
So then was that sort of what turned the light on and made you guys want to build your own? I mean, why? You're both obviously very excellent craftsmen. You could have built anything. You could have built a fuel dragster or a road race Lola or whatever. Why a Bonneville Streamliner?
Well, first off, we were impressed with this car. It had a blown flathead, and, we had a chance to go out and be on the crew for Don Gartlett's, which was a pretty unique thing. And John had been to the Salt Flats before with another car that he helped people with, and this was my first time. But it's a long trip back, 1,000 miles, a lot of hours on the road. And we started talking about how we could build a better car. This one was nice, but we could build a better one. Or at least we thought we could. So we started pursuing that, and we thought it'd be a several-year project. It wasn't, and we worked on it day and night for 9 months and got it done. But because we worked at the same place, we'd go to break at the same time, and we'd sit there on napkins in the lunchroom and start drawing parts that we wanted to make. And John had a lot of background as a machinist. So his shop had a lathe and a mill, and so there wasn't anything that we could dream up that John probably couldn't machine. So we're coming up because if you build a Streamliner, you can't go down to the speed shop and say, "Give me all the parts I need," because they don't have them. Each of them is different, and you make what you need, and everybody's got a different idea of what it's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to work, and some of them work well, and some of them work great, and some of them don't work at all, but everybody has their own ideas. So, a catalog for Streamliner parts is non-existent, or Streamliner bodies. You make everything. But we spent every night in John's shop. We had complementary skills. John was an excellent machinist, and I'd had a little bit of background there, but not like John had. And I did a lot of engine work, although John had done a lot of engine work. I did body and paint. John now can do body. We complemented each other because we both had skills that the other one didn't. I'm not sure either one of us could have built this car by ourselves.
I'm sure that's the case. It would have been a struggle for either one of us to do it. But really the first, after we decided to do it, on Thanksgiving weekend, we went to my shop and we had kind of sketched out what this car looks like, because you have to lay out, where the wheels are going to be, where the engine's going to be, where the driver's going to be, where the supercharger's going to be, the parachutes. And the damn thing was 27 foot long. And so we built a wooden model, full size, with a 2x6 down the middle of the car, cut wood wheels, actual size of the wheels and tires, out of plywood, And I sat Tim down on the floor. It was zero height off the ground. And he laid down on the floor like he'd be in the car, and you're actually laying on your back looking between your feet with your head propped up. And the height of the car was determined by a small block Chevy block on 4x4s, indicating no oil pan, just a dry sump, and a distributor. That was 29 inches high, and that's how high the car was going to be at the driver's head. And it proceeded from there. So.
And how long did it take to build it?
We spent 9 months. We had started the model, and like I say, John said, about Thanksgiving of 1988. And by August of 1989, we were ready to race.
And did you go to Speed Week that first year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you, before we get to that, I want to know, obviously 9 months to build something completely from the ground up, as ambitious as a Bonneville Streamliner. How did you balance working and sleeping and being with your families over the course of those 9 months?
Who needs sleep?
And we worked a lot of overtime then too. It wasn't as easy as we thought, but in that 9 months, I think Tim worked every day on the car some. I was sick 2 days, and I didn't work on the car, but we worked on a Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Every day we worked on that car, and we had goals of where we needed to be. Like when we got the car mocked up, we built a jig that was 28 foot long out of I-beams, and we built the car on this with a stainless steel wire down the center of it to get it symmetrical. Built the frame, welded it right to that jig as we built the car, built bulkheads, and as we built the car up, we had different dates. We have to have this done. We have to have the design of the parachutes. We have to have what day we're going to sandblast it, what day we're going to paint it. All that was timekeeping and just organizational skills that we both got from working at a big company. You had to have those organizational skills. So in the long run, it was tight getting it done.
Oh yeah. When we started out, we thought it was going to be a 2-year project.
Yeah.
And then we got so excited, we decided we thought we had enough innovations we didn't want anybody else to know about. So we're going to get this done for the first race that comes up. And there were, skills that John had, skills that I had, but there were skills that neither one of us had that we had to learn. I'd done body work and fiberglass work, but this is a 26-foot long car, and we had to build the mold and the body from scratch. And neither one of us had ever done that. My father worked for a company here in Lincoln that was a defense contractor, and he built missile casings and space shuttle parts and stuff out of fiberglass and carbon fiber. And so it was a kind of a question of how do we do this, Dad? He said, well, I can show you. Well, good, because this was not a chopper fiberglass gun. It was cloth laid out, and so we called upon people that had skills that we didn't have. We had a very large crew over the years, and some of them were with us for the whole 20 years.
Yeah.
People that were machinists, people that...
Welding.
John and I are both able to weld, but we tacked things together because we found a welder that was an absolute... He TIG welded 40 hours a week. Mm-hmm. There was no way we could... And he'd come out and do that. There are many, many talented people in the state of Nebraska that when you come up with something oddball like this that nobody else is doing, they want to get involved.
Yeah.
And they did. And, like I say, skills that we didn't have, other people did have. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to help, and they did. Mm-hmm. They didn't get paid. They did it because they were car guys that liked working on cars.
One of the innovative things we had was the aluminum front wheel idea, and we both worked through that very diligently because before we started the project, before Thanksgiving, I had a niece going to engineering school, and I had her check out all the aerodynamics books she had. Well, guess what? They're all about airplanes. Uh-huh. They aren't about cars. But we each read a couple books, and we had an idea of what we needed to do to get the car through the air, and to have the 15-inch diameter front wheels was key for our car. It also made it difficult to get into the car, but that was the key. But when we sent, it was innovative. Nobody had done that except for the Land Speed guy in '66 that had aluminum wheels, but they didn't steer. They just were outriggers on a jet engine. So when I sent the application with the engineering drawings in, I told them what we're going to do, and I made the mistake of saying, we've addressed the wheel speed issue. Well, that was a trigger, the wrong trigger, because we had done a very innovative system on the front suspension, and Carson Smith helped us with this, but we took a 9-inch Ford rear axle, which is a piece of forged steel, very strong. We didn't want taper roller bearings that would generate heat, so we put a caged roller bearing in, a McGill cage roller bearing, big ones on the hub, and in a ball thrust so you steer it, and machine the hubs out at home, and then we took the stub axle at the NAPA at that time, and Joe Hall, who works up at CarQuest now, actually put on a crankshaft grinder, and we ground all the bearing surfaces, the face of the wheel, the registry for the wheel, all in one swoop between centers. And I sent them that information, and I shouldn't have said we've addressed the wheel speed, because they probably thought, oh, what's wheel speed going to be on this? And it was going to be 6,721 RPM at the 320 miles an hour we hope to go eventually. So we had done the work on it, but we shared it. By then we shared it to them. We didn't share them the bearings, but we shared them everything else. And so there were other cars. The second year we had the car out there were 2 other cars that had copied our design.
So the aluminum wheels, that was meant to, that was the only way you could get a 15-inch tall wheel. There was nothing that was speed rated that was that size.
No.
We investigated like aircraft nose wheels off of fighter jets and stuff. And what we found is that they had a tremendous weight load capacity, but they didn't have a huge speed capacity. And if we were to use a normal 15-inch wheel with a 26-inch tall tire, it made for, a big front end. And at the time we built the car, tires were very hard to come by anyway, even for the rear. And they weren't very reliable to start with, and to have one in the front that might blow up was something we wanted to avoid, and the aluminum wheel cured that completely.
They built their Streamliner from scratch in only 9 months. Suddenly, it was August 1989. The time to see if it would work had arrived. But before they could try out their new creation, they had to make it past inspection. The trouble was, they had something so revolutionary, it stumped the inspectors. It seemed like everyone wanted to flag them for a violation, but couldn't actually find any. So you made it to Bonneville in '89. How did it go? How did your first time out with the car go?
Inspection was interesting, to say the least. Everybody in the world wanted to have a hand in saying this car's not legal.
Because of the wheels?
Because of everything. I mean, we had done so much investigation and thinking through this on our own. I mean, some of the very simple things like parachute releases on all cars back then had a cable. So what happens when you have a fire with a cable? The sheath shields the cable. You can't pull the parachute. Mm-hmm. So we'd done mechanical linkage all the way back, which was a big job. Every hydraulic line, and we had a hydraulic clutch, brakes, and steering, had to go by the bell housing. How do you do that? We had to build tubes for it, put the lines through the tubes, and weld them to the chassis. And the steering wheel was a big issue because it was a butterfly steering wheel, and they didn't like that. Well, your hand could slip off. Well, if you look with the canopy closed, you can't even get your hand off of it. You have to open your hand up to pull it around. Mm-hmm. So they just challenged about everything, the fire suppression system, parachutes.
They couldn't find anything. But one of the reasons they scrutinized it so much is the car was so small compared to everything else that had been out there. It was long, but the actual height and width of the car was very small compared to everything else. So how do you get everything in there? we also did a few innovative things. They were concerned about safety. I think we were the first Streamliner for sure where the driver had arm restraints and leg restraints all tied into the seatbelt system. So you had a 6-point seatbelt, 2 arm restraints, 2 leg restraints, all of which could be quick released. And eventually, they actually put that in the safety rules so that everybody had to use it.
Yeah.
They knew it wouldn't set a record. I mean, this car won't set a record because everybody's running fuel injection, mechanical fuel injection. And one guy walked up and looked at it and said, "That looks like the motor in my pickup truck."
Tow truck motor.
They were laughing at us. You guys are from Nebraska. Do you really have machine shops out there?
They ask us that. Do you have machine shop there? Where do you get this work done?
Did you order stuff from California? I said, well, we got one of the biggest speed shops in the country in Lincoln, Nebraska. So you guys are buying from Lincoln. It's not the other way around. But we set the record and bumped it up. And the guy that held it was a veteran land speed racer, and we bumped it up about 12 miles an hour.
Which is a lot at Bonneville.
Which is a lot. And then the next meet, we bumped it up again, almost 18 miles an hour. But one of the guys that was one of the top 2 fastest people at Bonneville at the time came over and went over the car. Says, "I got to see how you got that engine in this car this small." And he was a guy that he really kept to himself. He didn't talk to a lot of people, but he went fast. He'd been at 400 mile an hour before with a big block Chevy, and he had to come over. And I had a lot of respect for the guy because he was smart enough to say, maybe they got something I don't. I'm going to look. Maybe they don't have anything that I don't already know about. But it was kind of nice to talk to the guy because other people had come around and laughed at us because you got a carburetor on this. You're not going to go fast. Well, a carburetor can go just as fast as fancy fuel injection if it's tuned right.
So once you made it through tech and you actually got to make your first pass, Tim, you were the driver.
That first meet.
How did that feel to, your 9 months of killing yourself to build the thing? How did it feel to finally get to drop the hammer and head toward the horizon?
Well, you didn't get to drop the hammer because there's a licensing requirement.
Oh, right.
Which is probably good because, you're not used to doing that. There's 5 steps to get up to your over 200 license. You got to start at 125. You get between 125 and 150, and then it goes up by 25 mile an hour increments. If you go too slow on that run or too fast, you're disqualified on that run. You got to do it again because you got to prove you can do the right speed. Well, the car doesn't have a speedometer, but we calculate it out.
Right.
In high gear, the tach's got to read this. So I had to make 5 runs before we could actually go after the record we were after, which was 237. And I was now licensed for a run up to 250.
Yep.
So did you set a record your first meet?
We did. We went 248.688 miles per hour was our two-way average.
In what class?
That was in the D gasoline unblown class.
Okay.
A 302 Chevy with a 4-barrel carburetor.
This is old hat for you guys, but not a lot of people have gone that fast. Not a lot of people have even been to Bonneville. Like, how do you drive? How do you even sit in the car? The whole thing is as tall as a small block Chevy. How do you get a human in there to actually drive it?
Well, if you've ever been to a funeral and saw the deceased in a casket, they got a lot of room. This car is tight. But all the controls are within where you need them. Just to go over controls, the left side is a shifter for the 4-speed transmission. The right side are 2 levers for parachutes, both within where your arms are by your side. You can take your hand off the steering wheel, either the left or the right, depending on what you're... And within a couple of inches, you've got the control. The kill switch is right on the steering wheel.
Fire bottles.
Fire bottles are right down in about the same place, down where your hands are. So you only have to move your hand maybe 6 or 8 inches in order to use all controls at all times. But it's, it's a fun deal. It's like a drag car, only you got to go 5 miles, and you're not shifting every 2 seconds. You're in first gear for quite a while because you've got a very high rear end ratio. That I think that first year we were running about 250 or 260 overall gear ratio. But it's a thrilling feeling. As you go faster and faster. But the one thing about Bonneville, like our car, I was laying back with, like John had said, with my head up. I couldn't move my head. It was pretty much wedged in the roll bar padding. You couldn't move really anything. You were encased. But speed at Bonneville, it can be difficult to judge because you don't have a frame of reference. There's not a fence next to the road. There's not telephone poles. There's a mile marker every mile. And when you're a mile away, you can barely see it. And they mark both sides of the track. But you kind of get an idea how fast you're going by how quick those mile markers come up. By the time you get to the 4 mile through the 4 to the 5, that marker comes up fairly quick, particularly when you get over the 300s and stuff.
Above 300, how long does it take to go a mile?
12 seconds.
About 11 seconds, 12 seconds.
So what was the fastest the car ever went?
They give you times or mile and hours at every mile after the 3, and it's the average speed over a mile. And those are used for official records. The exit speed, they've got a little trap like a drag race has got. And that's not used for anything other than that you feel good because you went that fast. But the fastest exit speed I ever had was 346. And the car was still accelerating.
And was that on a record run?
That was on a record run, yeah.
So then what did the record end up being?
The record ended up being 328.9. The down run was faster than the return run. I had a rocker arm problem about 4 miles in on the return run, but it still made enough horsepower to get us the record. So,
talk about the learning curve from your first time there in '89 on through, eventually going 100 miles an hour faster, really, than your first record. What were some of the things that you learned over the course of running the car?
Well, I think one of the best things we did was streamline the body tremendously over the first. We did roll the car in 92.
90.
We rolled the car.
A tire exploded.
Yeah. And so we built a new body. That happened in August, and we had it ready to race in October of that year with a new body. It wasn't painted, but they canceled the event. But we put better wheel pods on it. We put the body on so it was much smoother on the outside, eliminated all the Zeus buttons that were external. We put a stabilizer on it that was about 5.5 feet tall from the ground. Over the 29 inches, it went up another 2.5 feet. And I think that was probably the main thing that boosted us. And then the tires that were developed in the mid-90s, the new Mickey Thompsons, those is what really changed the car.
Yep.
Characteristic. They were flat rather than a balloon-looking tire, much more traction.
The old tires at 300 were very marginal. The new ones were good to 400 and maybe beyond.
How many years had you been running it when it rolled?
That would have been like the second year.
Okay.
A rear tire blew out, which immediately shredded it. The steel wheel caught the salt and just flipped the car sideways. By the time I knew the back end was coming around, I pulled the parachutes, but it was way too late.
How fast were you going?
I was under 200. It was not that far into the run. And because it's kind of like rolling a pencil. It's if you rolled a pencil end over end, that'd be one thing, but it just kind of rolls on the flat surface. It rolled 9 times, but it certainly destroyed the body, but it didn't do much damage to the car otherwise. And I got a few bruises from the seat belts. You get enough G-forces when it goes, but otherwise, the car was really in excellent shape.
Cracked one weld on it and bent both front spindles. That was the major work on other than the body.
And you had the presence of mind to pull the chutes. What else was going through your mind?
I don't know, you can broadcast this, but you know, it happened so fast. It was just hang on, because you just, you know, you didn't know what to do. Or, you know, you're suited up good, you're belted in well. You know, the biggest thing is I just kept my hands on the steering wheel and let it stop.
And the adrenaline was going because the steering shaft was a piece of 5/8 stainless steel. He didn't release the steering, he just bent the thing up when it stopped. And he was out of the car before the safety crew got to him, standing up, waving. I'm okay, I'm okay. And we had a couple of videos sent to us, spectators took. Sent to us.
Obviously, that's a testament to how well the car was built, that you could roll it at 200 miles an hour and
it cracked one weld, and it was way back at the rear.
Yeah, around the cage area, it didn't.
It was strong.
Other than grind some of the paint off of the roll cage and that stuff, it didn't. But we, you know, when John and I build it, we build it so that we could both drive it and both feel safe in it. And, you know, I'd been asked by other people, would you drive my car? And the answer was always emphatically no, because I don't know who built it and I don't know how it's maintained. And first off, I don't want to kill myself, but I also don't want to wreck your car.
John, did you ever drive it?
Yes. Second year, first event, I drove it.
In September.
September. I drove it 3 times.
5 times.
5 times?
Because you had to get your license.
Oh, yeah, I got my license, okay. And we were running on our own record of 248, and we'd done some modifications to the engine in that 2-month period there, and we put a nitrous plate under the carburetor. We weren't running nitrous at the time, but we were ready for it after I'd set a record with this. It's a 4-day meet. And so I could not get it that fast. I could not get it to go 248. Maybe it's my driving skills. Maybe I didn't have my foot in it. I don't know. But Tim got in it. He went 265 or something like that. 264.
But the key was it screwed up the air intake. Yeah. We had a very small NACA type scoop, and by putting this 1/2-inch nitrous plate in, you know, that we were so concerned about aerodynamics that the air wouldn't make the turn into the carburetor. So we were starving the carburetor. So we took the nitrous plate off, and we had basically one last chance. And John said, "You better drive." And I said, "Well, I think it's the nitrous plate," but he said, "You better drive." And our horsepower came back, and even more. And so it was one of those. But yeah, John's had the car at about 250.
Yeah, and so after that, we decided that with so few runs for the car every year, some years we only made 2 passes. Some years we made no passes. We couldn't keep 2 drivers qualified in our heads to run this. So I just said, "Tim, you drive it." And I don't think he was married at the time. That wasn't a problem. So
and I didn't argue with him about, you know, if I have to drive all the time, I'll make that sacrifice.
And so you were thinking, you know, you were married, you had kids.
Barb was thinking that.
The car has always been small block Chevy powered?
Always.
But you've run it in different classes with different configurations, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just a kind of a brief Bonneville history is, you know, the drag racing has a lot of classes. And if you don't drag race, you figure like, my God, what's so many classes? Well, Bonneville's kind of the same way. You're classed by body style, and Streamliner is the ultimate body style. You can do anything you want. The stock-bodied cars don't fit into it. Cars with exposed tires and wheels don't fit it. Streamliner should be the ultimate fastest car, and they are because of the designs. And you can do any body thing you want. The other thing they class you by is engine size. And then is it gasoline or is it fuel? And fuel can be ethanol, methanol, nitromethane, or an unapproved race gas, or if you add nitrous oxide, they call that a fuel car. So we raced either, and then there are configurations for blown cars. So anything turbocharged, supercharged, whatever is a blown car. And we raced some fuel classes with the same engines we ran the gas classes with, only with nitrous oxide. And we ran 2 classes, I guess, with blown small block Chevys that were turbocharged. But all of our cars always ran gas. We never stepped up to methanol or any of that stuff, or nitromethane.
Did you always build the engines?
I did. I talked about John being an excellent machinist. We built engines that nobody made parts for. Small block Chevy, I know there's a lot of parts for small block Chevys, but we designed a lot of our own parts. And one of those parts, in conjunction with a couple of students from the University of Nebraska that were in the master's program in engineering, we designed, between John and I and the two students, an intake manifold with 12-inch runners, but that was only 10 inches high and had a large plenum, and it fed air in from the back, which would normally be where the distributor was on a small block Chevy. Well, that intake manifold, I think John had close to 400 hours of machine work in making that. And then, of course, one of our friends that was a good welder welded it all up. And there's two of them, and there's one of them is on the car in the museum now, and then there's still a second one, our spare. But those were the kind of things that we did. And it's like John made, I wanted a distributor that ran off the crank. A number of the cam companies make those, and MSD, but none of them are what we wanted. So I told John what I needed, and John made it. Mm-hmm. And it worked great. And it's on the car right now because that's the engine that's in there. But we did things that other people didn't do because we made parts for our engines that weren't off the shelf.
Even the stock blocks we modified. I mean, we put the normal screens and epoxy this closed and that closed. Mm-hmm. But the very small engine we had was a 259 cubic inch. In the heads we had to set the block up on the mill and relieve the block for the valves. Little things like that, people don't think about how much time it takes.
Right.
Tim figured it all out, and we did it. So
it had a 3 7/8 bore and a 2 3/4 stroke. One of those engines you could rev forever because that's short stroke. But with the bigger valve heads, it would hit the side of and then once it opened up so far, it cleared, but we were able to notch it far enough down that it didn't get into the rings, but it worked good. And I think somewhere I'd read that some old 283 super stock guys or whatever, once upon a time had to do that, and we did it.
I want to go back to that intake manifold because I've heard, and I want to say that maybe it was Robbie Unser that told me this, that long runner, low profile intake manifold that you made for your small block Chevy bears a lot of resemblance to the intake that came out on the LS1 engine when it showed up in the Corvettes and the Camaros. And you guys were sort of associated with GM Performance or Chevy Performance at one point. Is there any connection to your intake design and then what ended up being the LS1 intake?
No, there's not a connection.
I think, they may have had some designs like that long before
we did
they ever put it on an engine for production, but we didn't have any consultation with them about it.
But they actually came to our house when we were doing the Pikes Peak cars with Speedways. And when we showed them that, one of the engineers said, "Do you have a patent on that?" Because they hadn't released theirs to the public yet. And here we had one we were racing.
Oh. So
they were concerned about that. We said, "No, we can't fight you guys," or whoever. So we didn't ever even pursue a patent on it. But I'm sure they had theirs patent long before they saw ours.
That clears that up.
And there's some definite discrepancies between the two. They're not They're not identical or anything.
Ours has 16 injectors. 8 of them are inside the engine and 8 of them on the outside. So you can only see 8 at any one time. And they don't do that. They have bigger injectors now. We always had 35-pound injector, the biggest you could buy at the time, and it took 16 to get our horsepower.
So you were running mechanical fuel injection, or was this EFI?
Electronic.
Okay. And this was pretty early on for aftermarket EFI. You couldn't just order up a Holley Terminator.
No, actually, It was in 89. We went from carburetor to injection between 89 and 90, and John Meany, who owned DFI, Digital Fuel Injection, helped us out.
Okay.
And that was good. That was really good.
Did that always perform the way that it was supposed to? There wasn't like a learning curve where you had a...
I'm sure
there's a much bigger learning curve on that old system than the new stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You had to program the map, everything. The new stuff, you tell your engine how big your cam is and how much compression, and it'll start up, it'll run. This had to have complete programming. But again, that comes back to some of the talented people we met. A couple of the students at the university in the master's program had been working with this from day one, and they'd used the Meany system, not on anything with this much horsepower, but they knew how to do that, and they were on our crew. So again, having the right people. John and I didn't have all the knowledge of everything, but we had people that did. Everybody had a piece.
Was there, of all of the engines and all of the configurations, nitrous, turbocharged, big displacement, small displacement, was there one that was your favorite, that was just the sweetest engine?
Obviously the little 302 that set the first record, and it was the only engine we had. In fact, we could hardly afford spark plugs by the time we got the car done, was obviously my favorite to start with, because I've got a picture of it on my wall in my shop. When we built the turbocharged engine and we went over 300 on about the second run, that kind of took first place. But the last record we set was with the 302 running nitrous, and it went 323 miles an hour with a carburetor and a 302-inch engine.
Same engine.
Mm-hmm. Really?
We modified it over the years, kept improving it, but it's the same engine that I set the first record with and the last record.
Yeah.
In different classes. So I guess that one's my favorite.
In just a minute, John and Tim talk about some of the talented people that helped them out over the years. But first, if you want to see John and Tim's Streamliner being built and making its 300-mile-per-hour runs, visit the Toolbox, our automotive blog. Find it at speedwaymotors.com by clicking the Toolbox link on the front page. We'll also share a few photos on Facebook and Instagram. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Music, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. So how long did you campaign the car?
Well, it would be 21 years.
21 or 22 years.
Started in 89, and last year was 2010.
How, that's a fairly significant chunk of time. How did your relationship change? How did Bonneville change? What happened over the course of those 22, 21 years?
Well, there was a while when it was almost an obsession.
Yeah. My wife called it an obsession, not a hobby. But actually, we were so involved with trying to make things work. We worked through a lot of issues like, I don't want to do that, or Tim didn't want to do it, I didn't want to do it. But we always were able to work through them. I think one of the biggest things we had was the organization of getting our crap ready to go. I mean, it wasn't just to pack up your toolbox and put it in the truck and go. Mm-hmm. You took everything you owned just about, because there's nothing out there. There's no welders, there's no air compressors, there's no water. So, to get everything ready, Tim bought a bus.
School bus.
And we outfitted it. Of course, it was still yellow and black the first year, and I don't want to know if we're going to set a school bus record. But, over the years, we spent a lot of money on tow trucks and a lot of time on trucks and trailers, just keeping that stuff running, because you only run it once or twice a year out there, and you park it on the salt and get salt all over it. You really got to take care of it. And we went through a couple pickup trucks with different body panels, doors, fenders. It's just impossible.
Yeah, we never took a new pickup truck out there. A good used pickup truck and rebuild the engine and do some body work on it was cheaper and just as reliable, and then the extra money could go into the race car instead of a fancy truck.
Yeah, I mean, the salt is awful. I mean, anybody who's been there, you spend a week at the car wash when you get back. What did you have to do to the car every year to keep it from self-destructing?
You took it apart, every single piece.
We maintained it meticulously. I mean, we didn't just take the rear end out. We disassembled the rear end. We disassembled the transmission, disassembled the front hubs. Every single piece of that car came apart, got cleaned, polished, sometimes powder coated or painted and reassembled. Every piece.
We had a lot of aluminum and stainless on the car, and John spent a lot of time in front of the buffing wheel because he did a lot of the polishing. I did too, but John did most of the polishing. But, we wanted the car to look good when we got there. But the only way to make sure you didn't have things corroded was you took it apart. And anybody that knows John knows that John is a man that keeps a list. And I see you smiling, so you know this. John likes lists. And we took all our parts out with us, and John had a notebook for every drawer or toolbox drawer or shelf in this bus, and we inventoried, before we left, every single part to make sure we had them and we knew where they were so that we didn't have to go through hours worth of searching. And we did the same thing on the car. We went down the list. Is there gear lube in the rear end? Is there gear lube in the transmission? Have all the brakes been bled? Have all the hydraulic systems been bled? Everything, because, again, like John had said, you get out to Bonneville, there is nothing.
A lot of people came to us to borrow stuff because they knew we had it.
Technically, those are your competitors.
Yes.
Is there sort of a Bonneville community what would you say about the community of people who drive out to the middle of nowhere once a year and run their cars?
Well, they're all kind of nuts like we are, but the fact is they all know that we're there for one time or two times a year, and they want to help you out. It's changing quite a bit since we started racing. I mean, the first time I ever went, you could borrow just about anything from anybody. Anymore, it's not quite. There's so much money in some of the cars and people have that, they just don't do that. It's not like it used to be. Now, maybe in some of the lower classes it is. I don't know.
The people that I would consider amateurs, which we were, and technically everybody at Bonneville is an amateur. If you set a record, you'll get a trophy. It'll probably be the most expensive trophy in money and hours that you've ever won in your life. But there is no prize money, no matter what you do. And so that, there's always somebody that wants the fastest car in the world. And that's where the biggest money is. But there are many classes where it's just the average guy. Some of them who've raced out there for 20 years and have never set a record. But they're out there trying, and they come back the next year and they're 2 miles an hour faster. But somebody raised the record up another 2 or 3 miles an hour, so they're always a couple miles an hour short, or maybe even more. But they keep trying, and I think they have darn near as much fun as the guys that are going 400 miles an hour. Because they're doing something that not everybody has the opportunity to do.
The smallest event we probably ever went to was probably the World of Speed. The first year they had the World of Speed was in October. And there might have been 30 cars there, 35 cars maybe.
The fastest, yeah, all the fast guys.
All the fast guys. And we went really fast. And that's when we did 326, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was in 1990.
With a carburetor. And then...
that was with the turbo motor.
Yeah, that was with the turbo motor. And then the first year we did. Then the biggest events towards the end now, they get over 500 cars in these events now. So there's a huge discrepancy in, the crowd size is very small. You got to be pretty hardcore to go sit and watch these guys run on salt. A lot of people do.
The best way to be a spectator is to be a member of somebody's crew.
Yeah.
Volunteer to help somebody out that needs a hand. And I'd say right now, we had a crew that they paid for their motel rooms. In many cases, they'd ride out with us in the bus or in the four-door truck, but some of them had to drive themselves out because we had enough people. They did it for free. I mean, we'd buy them dinner, but, We couldn't have a paid crew, and they had to use their vacations.
That was a big deal.
These are people that had fun. They enjoyed it. They did it because they liked it. And not all of them made it every year for 20 years, but there was quite a few that did.
And you guys were more or less paying for this out of your pockets. I mean, it always said Speedway Motors on the side of the car, but you weren't some big giant corporation that was out there spending millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. We, Speedway was a good sponsor for us, and it was one of the things that Bill kind of really liked to have us do. But General Motors helped us the very first year.
Well, after we set the first record.
Yeah.
They came on bigger then. They did give us a few parts.
But other than that, we got spark plugs from Champion, we got wires from Taylor, we got pistons from Aries, we got crankshafts. We had to make the crankshafts. The rods got from Oliver. We bought all our intakes and carburetors, what Speedway didn't donate. But yes, basically it was out of our pocket.
Yeah, nobody wrote us any checks.
The year we rolled the car, Square D wrote us a check for the new materials, like $2,500 to build a new body. And that was the only cash, I think.
So how did you, I mean, you were setting records. How did you sort of operate out of your pockets up against the big money teams that had big, giant $1 million? Well,
there weren't big money teams back when we started this. I mean, the fast guys were Nolan White, Al Tig, the car out of Idaho. I mean, most of the cars were family-run cars.
There were certainly some of them that financially were.
Yeah.
But it wasn't these $1 million teams that some of them are today.
Yeah. So this car put you, Tim, in the 2 club and the 3 club. So you have a red hat and a blue hat, right?
Yeah.
Looking back over all of the records, is there one that stands out as being the most meaningful to either one of you?
I think it comes back to the last one we set just because it was the last one. And it was with my favorite engine that always seemed to take good care of me. With the turbocharged engine, it was a C engine, a small block Chevy, which I could go anywhere between 306 and 372 cubes. 360 cubes is where it was at. It was way more powerful, but the record wasn't that much higher. It was really difficult to drive because you could light the tires up at 250 miles an hour. And the traction control was my right foot. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't near as much fun to drive as the 302, either with or without nitrous, because by the time I was up well into first gear, I could have my foot in it the whole way down the course. And it kept traction. Where the turbo motor, it was, traction control would have been nice, which you can use today. Back when we were racing, they banned them, and it came down to the point where they couldn't tell the difference between data recorders and traction control, so they threw the rule out on traction control and said you can use it. And it helps the really fast cars.
Yeah, it does.
You start slipping, it pulls the timing out, and the tires quit slipping, and you don't have to back off the throttle, and makes a difference. It makes you a little faster.
How many records did you set in all?
8.
8 or 9.
And some of them were, we set the record in the same class. We
8.
Bumped it up the next year.
8.
Do any of them still stand?
2. 323 and 328. 2 fast ones.
The one turbo motor that's in the car now, and then that little 302 that we set the last record with.
Why did you retire the car?
We'd done it for 2 decades, and it was time. We originally, John and I thought, well, we'll do this for 5 years. Well, we didn't. We did it for 20. But they had changed the rules. And this, as I've told you how tight the car is. The last year we raced, they were encouraging everyone to wear a Hans device. Because, it went through all the racing, drag racing, NASCAR, everything. And this car is so tight that I could not get in it or out of it with a Hans device on. I wouldn't fit.
Today's Hans devices, you might be able to, but back then they were bulkier.
Yeah.
And then the next year they changed the roll cage requirements. We would have had to totally gut the car, build new body. And it just, it was time, we were getting a little older, and it was time to take on some other projects.
How did that the last time a across the lake bed. How did that feel?
Well, you feel like you don't want to get out of the car because it's your last time, and you know it's your last time. But all good things must come to an end. We were very fortunate to do what we did, and I wouldn't trade anything for that.
So the Streamliner now sits in the Museum of American Speed. It's where we're recording this, so it's right below us and about 30 feet over. How do you guys come visit it? I mean, how does it feel to have it in a big automotive museum?
I think it's an honor to have it here. I mean, if it's sitting in either one of our garages, nobody ever see it. That's the best thing, that people can see what was going on, what we did. That's the whole purpose of this museum, to show the public what's going on in automotive history. So I'm very comfortable having it here.
Yeah, having it in the museum, it's always clean. It's one thing I'll say about the car is, there are cars in museums around the country that were race cars, and the engine may be missing a piston or a valve train. This car, if you put batteries in it and gasoline and oil in it, you could start the engine and race it. It's ready to race again. And there's an awful lot of expensive speed parts in there that probably could have found their way into something else, but the car is as raced. It is ready to run. There's no broken parts in it or holes in the block. It is ready to run. So
probably the best engine you ever built, too.
And that's the 302?
No,
this is the turbo motor.
Oh, okay.
It's got brand new AFR heads on it. I mean, everything is first class in this engine.
But it's nice to come see it. It's kind of like an old friend that, maybe like an old girlfriend that you miss or something. It's nice to stop by and see it and appreciate the fact that if we had it in the garage at home or in storage, the museum's such a clean environment. This way it's preserved, and it's right now it's surrounded by other Bonneville cars, which is kind of the way it belongs.
Do you come August, September every year and you see people driving through on 80 with their Bonneville cars on the trailers, and you read about the records? Do you ever miss it?
I don't know. I went back once, and without a car, you thrash the whole time you're there. You work from sun up till sundown, then you go eat and sleep a little bit. I went back without a car, and I was bored silly. I mean, there was just nothing to do. You only look at them so long. If you're used to working on one out there.
I haven't been back at all. As a spectator out there, you don't get to see. You stand around the 2 mile mark as far as they'll let the spectators go. Mm-hmm. And the real show of a Bonneville car is crossing the line at the 5 mile mark. That's where the car is really moving. And hopefully stopping. Not too far down this crack.
We pretty much had our pits set up so that people could walk right up and stand on the trailer if they want and look at the details of our car. A lot of people don't allow that, and we thought that was good advertising for Speedway, but it was also good to show what went into building this car, and we answered questions very freely. I don't think people ask us too many things that we didn't want to tell them. I mean, the front bearing hubs may have been one thing, but the rear end ratio, they ask about that. But, it's got a standard Muncie transmission, and it's got Liberty gears and parts in it, but it's a Muncie case.
Yeah. Actually, the transmission's got a whole story behind it.
You might as well tell it. That's what we're here for.
Okay. When we started in '89, we're building the car. It would have been nice to go out and buy a brand new late model transmission, but John had a Muncie in good shape. We used it. We had to make special linkage and it ended up on the left side of the car to go to the transmission that was behind you. We worked on that for a long time, and then Carson Smith came up and said, that's kind of like they do in a Volkswagen. Well, I'd never had a Volkswagen, so I didn't know. But we ran that, and with the 302 naturally aspirated, it worked just fine. We built the turbo motor, and it would blow it out of gear. So we're out there, and we got some good runs on it, but it was hard to keep it in gear because of the torque of the turbo motor. And a man walks up, and Al Borland, I believe.
No, Steve Bechtel.
Well, Steve's the guy that built the transmission.
Yeah.
But Al's the guy that
Introduced us, yeah.
he comes up and says, I know a guy back in New Jersey that builds all the top Muncies for all the drag racers back there. And, we'd met really smart people at Bonneville, and we've also met people that, knew everything about everything but never built a car. And anyway, Al put us in touch with Steve Bechtold from New Jersey. And he said, yeah, I'd be happy to, I rebuild these. And he welds stuff up inside them and moves the cluster shaft closer to the main shaft and, puts face dog synchros and different gears in. And he sent us the transmission, did everything for us for free, did the whole deal. We put it in the car, and he shows up at Bonneville so that in case there's anything wrong with the transmission, he can take care of it.
Wow.
And he went to Bonneville virtually every year.
Yeah.
And then we'd take the car back every year, and we tore it down. We took the transmission out. We crated it up, and we sent it back to New Jersey, and Steve would go through the transmission every year. So if you're listening, Steve, back there in New Jersey, thank you. Because he did us a great service, because there's no way that the horsepower we're making with that turbo engine could ever stand up to that Muncie. But once he did it, it was perfect. We never had a problem.
When we rolled the car, we broke it up really bad, broke the tail shaft, broke 3 of the ears off the front of it. We just put all the pieces in a crate and sent it to him. That's the year he put the dogs in the synchronizers, and it came back really nice.
Something about that reminds me of one thing that I wanted to ask you. At one point, I remember reading that your car was the world's fastest small block Chevy.
Correct.
For a short time. Is that right?
Yep.
Well, I think so. At Bonneville, you have class records. Whether you have the fastest small block Chevy or the fastest Ford or the fastest Fiat or the fastest moped, you get some pride out of it, but there's no official record for that. But when we went 326, nobody out there had ever seen a small block Chevy do that over 300 like that. So, it kind of came out that, you guys are the fastest small block Chevy.
Rick Vesco, who's a Bonneville staple.
Been there since the 50s with his dad.
Yeah. He came up to us and said, you now have the fastest small block Chevy.
Which only lasted for a couple of years. And then
4
somebody
years.
else did
4
it.
years.
I mean, that's still pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, considering that there's probably 10 million small block Chevys that have been race motors before.
Right.
We still have the block at home. It's broken now, but we still got it. Someday it'll be here.
But, I'll quote what somebody once told me at Bonneville. He says, everybody at Bonneville has the fastest something. And that may be true. But it didn't make us feel bad. We were still pretty proud of it.
I mean, that's the end of the questions that I have for you guys. I mean, is there anything else that you want to say or elaborate on?
We need to thank Speedway Motors for all their support for the 22 years we raced the car, 21 years, because Bill wasn't sure that we were going to get the car done until he came out and saw it one day and said, okay, what do you need? And so he helped us over the hump the first year with fittings mostly. We were down to plumbing the car.
Well, and things like we're trying to bend roll cage tubing with a really rickety, and Bill let us use the big hydraulic bender out here, after hours and stuff to bend tubes, which for us was a huge savings. You could have somebody else bend tubes and then you get them, that's not quite as much as I wanted, so all those things help. And plus, Bill and Carson were both great technical resources. They were also able to line us up with people that sponsored us with parts, because if Bill Smith didn't know somebody in the speed equipment industry, then they weren't in the speed equipment industry. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it was a lot of help.
Thanks to John MacKichan and Tim Schulz for being our guests today, and thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video of what we talked about today, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com, and if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.